Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now well into our fourth season, and we are just as excited as ever to continue to help you explore and understand that unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today for today's show on plastics and plastic pollution. And today we're going to dig into what's so bad about plastic and why doesn't everybody know about this? Well, consider the amount of plastic that you put into the trash or your recycling bin, or perhaps on the ground, on a typical day. There's the lid to your coffee cup and perhaps a bag from a newspaper. There may be a wrapper from a granola bar, a yogurt container, a salad plastic container, and the plentiful packaging from inside a box that you got from Amazon. And many of these plastic items are useful and certainly convenient to us, but they also come at a very high environmental cost. In 2021, global trash generation, most of it plastic, was approximately 400 million tons, with the U.S. generating approximately 51 million tons of all of that. And that's somewhere in the vicinity of about 300 pounds per person in a single year. But only a fraction of that, around maybe 2.5 million tons, gets recycled. And so by the time these disposable products are in our hands, well, by that time they've already taken a toll on our planet. Plastics are mostly made from fossil fuels in an energy-intensive process that just spews out greenhouse gases and creates often hazardous chemicals and other stuff. And then that's what happens when you throw them away. If you're like most people, you probably assume that when you are throwing some plastics into the recycling bin, that it's going to be processed and turned into something new and good, and so we're not leaving a plastic footprint. But the truth, indeed, is that only a fraction of plastic is actually recycled. According to the most recent data estimates available from the EPA, only about 5 to 7% that was discarded in the U.S. in 2021 was actually recycled. So the popular perception that plastic is easily and widely recycled is one that has been shaped by decades of mismessaging. And recycling has been sold as a means of not worrying about the problem, says Judith Inc. And she's a former regional administrator at the EPA, and she's president of Beyond Plastics. And we're going to hear from them today, too. And their group is focused on ending plastic pollution. The companies paying for the ads that frame recycling as an easy solution, have a lot of different skin in the game, Inc. says. Now, one of four things happens to plastic after you and I are done with it. If it's not recycled, and it's usually not, then it's landfilled, it's incinerated, or just littered, thrown about. Now, the EPA estimates that in 2018, about 16% of the U.S. plastic waste was burned. Again, some littered, and most of the rest ended up in landfills, including a lot of that plastic that people very dutifully did indeed put into their recycling bins. Now, over the decades or even over the centuries, much of that littered and landfill plastic breaks down into very tiny particles called microplastics, which can contaminate our food, indeed, and they contaminate the air and water. And they also accumulate in our bodies, potentially increasing our risk for chronic inflammation and other illnesses. And the experts say that while cutting back on plastic use is indeed a worthy individual goal that each of us should have, the only way to stem the rising tide of plastic is for companies to make less of it and for recycling programs to be retooled so that more of what we throw away and we think we're recycling or we think good is happening to it, more of that is actually turned into something useful. In fact, every minute, the equivalent of one garbage truck full of plastic is dumped into our ocean. And plastic pollution really it's a global problem. Approximately 7 billion of the 9.2 billion tons of plastic produced between 1950 and 2017 became plastic waste, ending up in landfills or, again, just dumped somewhere. So plastic pollution can alter habitats and natural processes and reduce our environment's ecosystem's ability to adapt to things such as climate change, which is here and with us. And it directly affects already millions of people's livelihoods. It affects food production capabilities as well as our overall social well-being. Now, the United Nations Environment Program's work has indeed demonstrated that the problem of plastic pollution does not exist in a vacuum. The environmental, social, economic, and health risks of plastics have to be assessed alongside the other environmental stressors like climate change, as we mentioned, as well as degrading of our ecosystem and our resources. Now, the executive director of the United Nations Environment Program says we will not recycle our way out of the plastic pollution crisis. We need a systemic transformation to achieve the transition to a circular economy. And they are indeed working on that, and we'll talk more about that as we talk with our guest. So plastic, though, is incredibly useful in our modern life. But its widespread use and necessity, dare I say, we have to have it at this point, may impair human sustainability. But the production and disposal of plastic generates greenhouse gases and hazardous waste. Plastic and the chemicals that it spews forth are building up on land and in oceans, lakes, rivers, ice, and air. In fact, most plastic, only not recycled, it is not recyclable. And the vast majority does not biodegrade. In addition, plastic products often break down into very small fragments, smaller than the microplastics we mentioned before, into what's called nanoplastics that indeed can infiltrate human cells. So plastic is a big problem because it is everywhere, from bags and single-use bottles and packages to car parts, pipes, and siding. As well, plastic waste is abundant, and it's everywhere. It's been found, for example, in the Arctic sea ice. It's been found in beer. It's been found in farm soil, trout, and other freshwater fish, as well as shrimp and other shellfish. It's been found in human placentas, as well, of course, as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's also been found inside of sea caves, in the air and rain, and national parks and wilderness areas everywhere. So while the impact of plastic pollution on sea life is well documented, in recent years, scientists are more and more and increasingly measuring plastic's effects on humans and human fertility, as well as our land ecosystem, our crops, and our other plants. The main ingredients of plastic come from oil and natural gas processing. You've got different molecules that are used to make different types of plastic, giving them distinctive properties, such as the softness of plastic bags as compared to maybe the sturdiness of the plastic that's on your dashboard. So over 4,000 chemicals can be present in plastic packaging, and many of the most common ones can be hazardous to human health. Food packaging, though, is essential for transporting, storing, handling, and preserving food. So it's kind of hard to get away from plastics, but it can be done. The most common food packaging materials are different types of plastic polymers, and the packaging materials are used in combination with other materials such as printing inks, adhesives, and coatings, and lots more things, all adding to their human and environmental toxicity. Now, this is a lot, but Here today to help us unpack some of this are two experts who work almost all sides of this plastic issue. We have with us Christina Dubin, and she is with Beyond Plastics, whom I quoted earlier, and Dr. Cowger, and he is with the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution and Research. And we're just very happy they could join us. Now, Christina, again, with Beyond Plastics, which is a nationwide project, and it's based in Bennington College in Vermont. And they pair the wisdom and the experience of environmental policy experts with the energy and creativity of grassroots advocates to build a vibrant and effective movement to end plastic pollution, which is needed to save our planet and ourselves from the negative health, climate, and environmental impacts of the production, usage, and disposal or ill disposal of plastics. Christina works with local and affiliate groups across the country to organize and lead campaigns to grow the anti-plastic movement and advocate for policy solutions to the plastic crisis. Welcome, Christina, and did I get all of that right?
You sure did. Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we're so glad you could eke out time to join us today. And our other guest is Cowger. And Wynn is a research scientist at the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research. And the Moore Institute was founded by Captain Charles Moore, who is the renowned founder of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that we have heard about for some time. And it's still out there and growing. And Wynn studies the sources, transport, and fate of plastic pollution in the environment. And his science focuses primarily on identifying solutions to plastic pollution and assessing their effectiveness. He is an applied scientist, and their group couples with academics to implement science in practice. Welcome, Wynn. Did I get all of that right?
Thanks a lot. Yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you so much. We're going to go to break now, after which we will really dig into this. And now we want to give a shout out to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the green, healthy, and sustainable living authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. To today's show on plastics and plastic pollution. What's so bad about plastic and why doesn't everybody know about it? And again, we are back with Christina Dubin with Beyond Plastics and Cowger with the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research. And so I want to start out briefly with you, Christina. Could you tell us briefly about the history of plastic? At what point did it become a harmful polluter, or maybe at what point did we learn about that? And tell us briefly how plastic, Beyond Plastics is making a difference in that arena.
Sure. So believe it or not, plastics has not been around for very long. It seems like it's been around forever, but it has not. It was invented in the early 1900s, but it really didn't come into American households until after World War II. And it was a tough sell at first. If you want to see some disturbing images, you can Google babies in plastic ad and see a DuPont ad for cellophane, and I'll just leave it at that.
What did they do? Did they wrap the babies up in plastic or what?
Yeah, so there's a picture of a stork with a baby wrapped in plastic. It is an illustration, but basically delivering this message that the best things in life come wrapped in plastic.
Oh, so, my God. Okay.
Pretty strong message. Do not wrap babies in plastic. Not a good idea. So, the industry targeted housewives and this idea that plastic disposables were going to make life easier. Instead of doing the dishes, you can just throw the dishes away. So, this is when this idea of single use is really born, this single use culture, and plastics become this material of choice. And it isn't, I'll stop and say, it isn't the car bumpers or the medical devices made of plastic that we're seeing hanging from trees and clogging sewers and making mountains of trash here and in developing countries. It's single-use plastic. It's sachets and water bottles and plastic film bags, et cetera. And, after Rachel Carson released Silent Spring in the early 60s, there started to be this growing awareness, right, of the environment and pollution and toxins that all led to the creation of the EPA in 1970 under Nixon. So people were concerned. They were aware. But then there comes this innovation called recycling, right? And that was going to make everything okay.
Let me ask you this, though, Christina. When did plastic bags get on the scene?
I can't exactly speak to when those came on the scene, but
that seemed to just proliferate, blossom, just double or quadruple the amount of plastic that we all see and that's all around us is the plastic grocery bags.
Yes, and I think it was like mid-60s to early 70s, I'll say.
Yeah.
And that, yes, plastic film, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem, especially in marine environments, right? I will say recycling for other materials, for glass, for aluminum, for paper, for cardboard is great. We want people to keep recycling those materials. For plastics, it has never worked. As you heard, it's under 6% of plastics are getting recycled, and that number has never gone above 10%, even before China invoked their national sword policy and stopped allowing our trash being shipped to them under the guise of it being recycled. So we were counting, the EPA was counting those exports. We still do export, but not to the significant numbers that we were. So, what we need to do and what Beyond Plastics is working to do is to turn off that tap. We have the solutions we need already. We don't need a new technology. We don't need innovation. We need to reduce. We need to use reuse and refill systems, and we need to get away from this single use. So we just released a model bill with an organization that we work with called Just Zero. It's our Model Packaging Reduction and Recycling Act, and it calls for a 50% reduction in packaging over 10 years. And there are other components that make sure the rest of the materials being used are recyclable, creating a system where producers are financially responsible for the end of life of their packaging, which is huge. They have no incentive to change their behavior right now. I'm sure your listeners get shipments of things or buy things at the store and they're over-packaged and they don't need to be. And also, again, funding reuse and refill systems. We need these to be accessible to everybody.
Indeed, indeed. Now, let me ask you, Wynn, though, why is plastic and most things made of it a problem in our world today?
Yeah, so the main reason is that they're highly persistent in the environment. They're not easy to break down. There are some microbes and stuff that can really slowly break them down, or some people have heard of like worms and UV rays, but all of these processes are extremely slow. They take hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, and under the ideal conditions, they may never even break down. And so that's really the big problem, is that these polymers are too persistent and they're starting to accumulate in the environment. And
when you say break down, is that what most of us think is the definition, or think is biodegradable? We're told certain things we get, it's biodegradable, so that makes it good or better or natural or what have you.
Yep, pretty much, yeah.
What is that doing to our environment?
Well, we know that organisms can be harmed by plastics in the environment. It's really complicated to understand exactly which type of plastics harm which type of organisms. But we're continuing to discover more and more about that. And we do know that under lots of conditions that we've studied, we see plastics causing harm, and that's a problem. And as we continue to have more and more plastics build up in our environment, we may see a really different world. where, harm is extremely widespread even. And that's what we're really concerned about and trying to prevent.
Is there any statistic or any, intersection that we know about or can quantify between plastic and our fish population that feeds us? I mean, it's got to get inside the fish. How is it harming them? Is it reducing the fish available to us or making perhaps dangerous that fish that we do eat?
Yeah, there's been widespread records of occurrence of plastics in fish that are in commercial markets and shellfish. And so just like you said earlier, we really see it everywhere. We don't quite know yet whether or not we're ingesting more plastics by eating seafood versus just breathing air. Actually, there's a lot of microplastics in the air, and we think that's one of the largest sources of plastics that we're intaking.
How and where do the microplastics get in the air that we're and connect those dots for us? How and where do they get in the air, and then we're breathing them in? Sounds like it's a circular economy, but not the one that we want.
Right. Yeah, no, it's definitely not. All these plastics that are getting in the environment are getting back into us. One of the major sources is microfibers. So synthetic clothing fabric, you put that into your dryer machine, the dryer exhaust just pumps that out into the atmosphere. Also, we're just shedding the fibers all day long. Carpeting in your house is synthetic. So we're sitting around in our houses and just stirring up all of this plastic dust into the air that we're breathing. That I think are the major sources for plastic in the atmosphere. And
that's a microplastics that are spewing up.
That's right. Yep.
And then it was mentioned earlier, and I've heard and read about nanoplastics. Where do they come from?
Nanoplastics come from the breakdown of microplastics, primarily, or macro too. So just another smaller particle, and as you start going from large particles to small particles, the hazards change. I think you mentioned this earlier too. Somebody can suffocate on a plastic bag, but you'd never suffocate on a microplastic. But microplastics can get inside of your intestines and start to cause buildup there. Nanoplastics can actually pass the blood-brain barrier and cause problems with your brain functioning. So it's every step of the way, there's different hazards that we have to be concerned about.
That's a lot. And we keep learning more and more every day. But we're very glad that there are people out there like you, Wynn, who are, constantly looking and researching ways to get things better. I want to go back for just a minute to Christina, and we may have to finish your response on the other side because we only have about a minute to go. And that is, what do you tell people to get them to care about plastic pollution?
Yeah, I might have to finish this on the other side, but I'll tell you my 3 points here.
Okay.
I tell them about false solutions that they may think are actual solutions, about public health impacts, and about environmental justice. So first, with false solutions, recycling, mail-back programs, compostables, or bioplastics. These are taking us away from the real solution of reduction, right, and reuse and refill. Compostables mimic plastic. They're a polymer. They behave the same way in the marine environment, so they're still potentially harming marine life, breaking down into smaller pieces, being ingested. We're dealing with biomagnification.
So you basically, and I'm going to stop you here and we'll go back on the other side. You said that the smaller plastics, as they break down, they do the same thing the bigger ones do. So it's all the same. They're just smaller. We'll be right back on the other side for Christina to continue to make us smarter. Thank you all. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on plastics and plastic pollution, what's so bad about plastic and why doesn't everybody know about it. And we are back with Christina Dubin with Beyond Plastics and Wynn Cowger with the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research. And again, thank you all for being with us today. Now, Christina, before the break, you were in the midst of telling us what you tell people to get them to care about plastic pollution.
Yes. So just to review again, false solutions take us away from the real solution of reduction. So including recycling of plastics, chemical or advanced recycling, which is very dangerous right now.
So you're saying false, and I just want to dig into that. False solutions, and false solutions are some levels of recycling or recycling at all, or what?
Yeah, this idea that we can take plastic and make it back into a new product. Maybe you've heard of it like bottle to bottle, like I'm going to take this bottle, make it into a new bottle.
Yes.
A lot of plastic is plastic is downcycled. Recycling is downcycling. So bottles may end up as carpeting or, fleece. Any of those solutions actually don't deal with production. They don't deal with upstream impacts. So that's one thing. They're also... Because
I guess what you're saying is if you take a plastic bottle and you recycle it into another plastic bottle, what have we reduced?
Right. Yeah. We have to actually add more toxins. We have to add more chemicals, add some virgin plastic into that. You have energy. You have your emissions from producing that. And you haven't dealt with the waste at all because guess what? Plastic is not infinitely recyclable. It can be recycled a few times and then it needs to be burned or buried.
And most of us feel really good when we send our plastic bottles to recycling.
Yes. And so here's the thing, right? We all grew up as good recyclers, feeling great about that. I will say ones and twos, that resin coat on the bottom with the chasing arrow symbol, that symbol, if you don't know that there's numbers 1 through 7, that's not indicative of if it's recyclable and getting recycled. That's the resin code. And ones and twos, those have the best chance. So in states with bottle redemption programs, that's where we see high rates of recycling happening because they're source separated. They're clean, they're not contaminated, they're not mixed with other types of plastics. There's so many types of plastics, so many types of additives that give them their particular properties that make it a milk jug or a laundry detergent container or whatever it may be. And that's what creates this situation where it's extremely difficult. It was never economically viable. So we have to move away from that and we have to let go, even though for me, even it's really hard. I grew up making sure I put the right things in the bin. The right things in the bin are glass and paper and cardboard and aluminum. So there's that piece. Public health impacts. Each stage of production, usage, and disposal has public health impacts. And those impacts are the greatest on marginalized communities. So low-income communities, communities of color, they are shouldering this burden.
What are those public health impacts?
So those public health impacts may be in drinking water. They're in air quality. There's a lot of emissions that include dangerous, chemicals like benzene. And something, this is a little bit of a pivot here, but so because the mechanical kind of traditional system of recycling is being seen as ineffective, people are waking up to this. Industry is shifting to promoting advanced or chemical recycling. And this is very dangerous because they are trying to get state laws changed so that it is placed under manufacturing instead of waste management. And that allows them to escape clean air permitting regulations. That means more chemicals being put into the air for people to breathe in.
Indeed. And the thing about air is it doesn't stop at the boundaries. While marginalized communities get the brunt of it, we all get the air, just like we get I like to tell people, the example that everybody can see and knows about is that Saharan red dust that comes over. If that red dust is coming over from Africa, well, by golly, I imagine the polluted air from the benzene spew that may be across the street from the marginalized community, it's being felt everywhere in that community. So it really does make a difference, and it affects us all. Thank you for reminding everybody of that, really, Christina. Now, I want to go to Wynn now. Wynn, what would you say is perhaps, as Christina mentioned, there are lots of different types of plastics, but what would you say is perhaps the most harmful or impactful plastics, and I presume that would be single use, that's around us or that we're using every day?
That question is really hard to answer because there's so much we don't know about what is in the plastics. There are thousands of chemicals that are being added to plastics that there's no record of them. It's just the industry has produced them and is in some ways kind of running an experiment.
Wynn, let me ask you this. In order to give our listeners a really good example, just take some commonly used everyday plastic product and give them a sense or an indication of the types of chemicals and stuff that's going into that.
Yeah, some of the things, plasticizers, UV stabilizers, polymers. These are types
Paints,
of stuff that you really don't want to be eating, and it's hard to know if in a water bottle, for example. I don't know what the common chemicals are versus a plastic bag, because it's just so poorly reported. And we actually see you could take a bunch of water bottles and do toxicity tests on them, and you'll find different results, different toxicities per bottle. So in general, it's just safer to stay away from plastics and things that you're consuming. Yeah,
because you're starting with the essential ingredients of the plastics, the fossil fuels, and then you're adding all these other unknown ingredients, many of which are known to be harmful, but they're not these heavyweight chemicals. So I suppose it's not reported because we've not had the scientific evidence to pinpoint it yet. So let me ask you this, though, as well, Wynn. Can you tell us about some of the strongest attempts at making plastic or something like plastic without harmful additives?
Yeah, I mean, nature did such a great job to begin with. You have like cellulose and lignin. These are some polymers and we've been using these for a long time. I mean, I think Christina mentioned, there's edible foodware out there and stuff. Like all of the stuff that nature is already producing is really great. And the plastic industry has kind of convinced us that those things should be made out of plastic instead, should be made out of petroleum polymers instead. And yeah, so I think we had a good thing going originally, and maybe in some sense we should kind of go back to that. There are some new innovations that the industry is really trying to push for. One of them is biodegradable polymers. There's kind of mixed reviews, honestly, on how biodegradable those really are, and I haven't seen much evidence for those being any better than natural materials like cellulose and lignin in terms of their biodegradability or toxicity or anything like that.
So you're saying there are some new cutting-edge biodegradables that are not really biodegradable, or what?
Yeah, there's this really big issue, especially with PLA plastic, polylactic acid plastic, where it's claimed to be biodegradable, but it actually could only be biodegraded in an industrial composter, which has to reach these really high temperatures, and you can't just throw it in your home compost. There are some polymers that they're creating, PHA, there's some different PHAs, and those you can actually throw into your home composter. But again, I mean, you may be making a lot of microplastics from that. We don't fully understand the implications of those yet. They're very new. So we do know that they kind of break down, and we can't see them in their same form after a couple of years. So.
Indeed, but it seems like there's still a lot more to learn. Now, you all had mentioned, too, the edible tableware or edible utensils. What kind of things are those made of?
I don't know specifically. I know that typically, I don't think that corn is the best thing to go with, but that's a common source. And to be clear, I'm not talking about making corn into ethanol. I'm talking about
we're talking about things that you eat off tableware. So corn is one material that those kinds of things are made of. Any other types of material? I want people to be able to visualize, to hear and visualize what edible containers are made of, because that, I think that gets people's attention.
I mean, an ice cream cone, right? Like, instead of having your ice cream in a polystyrene dish or a plastic dish that the local place is serving in, you opt for a cone and you keep a reusable dish in your car. So I do this all the time with my kids. We bring our own spoon places. This places a lot of responsibility on the consumer. So going back to that idea of extended producer responsibility, producers need to be made responsible. And when they are, we're going to see more innovation, right? We're going to see more things and systems that allow us to move about in our daily lives and not have to remember to put a spoon in our back pocket or whatever, a straw or whatever it may be. That's great. Individual action is great, but it's really this policy change and shift, in our lives and the infrastructure that's going to really bring in the change that is needed to protect public health.
Indeed,
right?
indeed. And that's why we want to make sure here at Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio that people understand the necessity for this, because it's going to be, everyday people in their everyday lives who are driving the legislators and the public policy institutes to make this change, along with certainly people like you, the experts, but the everyday ordinary people have to know and understand it as well. We are going to go to break now, and we'll be right back on the other side so we can continue to learn and explore and unpack what plastic is doing to our lives every day. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the green, healthy, and sustainable living authority for the Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in most Whole Food markets, natural grocers, Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today, to our show on plastic and plastic pollution. What's so bad about plastics and why doesn't everybody know about it? And we have back with us today Christina Dubin with Beyond Plastics and Wynn Cowger, who is a research scientist at the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research. Again, thank you guys so much for being with us. I want to go back to you, Christina, and talk about any surveys. Have there been any surveys or studies that measure people's perception of plastic's harmful effects or the pollution effects of plastics?
There have been. So Pew has released a survey that gave us some perspective. I will say that I think that people are starting to be more educated about the health impacts, but their survey found that 2/3 of Americans say that using fewer single-use plastics would make a big difference for the environment. And 72% say that they themselves are using fewer disposable plastics for environmental reasons. Why would they be using less? Well, right, because of the negative impacts. And then a PBS NewsHour and Marist poll found 2/3 of Americans are willing to pay more for everyday items made from environmentally sustainable materials instead of single-use plastic.
Where are we going wrong with the ban of plastic grocery bags? Why can't that seem to catch on better, quicker, faster?
Well, because there's a lot of money on the opposition side, right? The American Chemistry Council, and industry and some grocers associations, what have you. That's where that resistance is coming in from. New Jersey just passed recently their trifecta that was similar to Vermont, so banning film bags and straws and polystyrene.
Now, excuse me just a minute, Christina. When you say film bags, is that you're referring to the plastic bags that we all know about that we get our groceries in?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So that is actually, Beyond Plastics, that is a big focus for our grassroots groups, is passing local policy or state level policy to get these items out, to ban them, or to put them upon request, not for bags, but for straws, for instance.
Indeed. I like that. Talk to us, though, about where you think or where you all see we should focus our efforts to battle plastic pollution.
Yeah, so, Christina's been saying it a lot, too. It's preventing plastics from, ever being produced would be the best kind of situation. Thinking about other ways that we can prevent waste, reuse, great one. So these are the kind of things that we can do in our everyday lives.
So what are you all seeing, though, Wynn, in terms of, Research Institute? What are some of the most important research questions in plastic pollution science that are out there today?
Currently, we're trying to better understand exactly how and when plastics cause toxicity to people, to organisms. And I think there are just tons of open questions in that space to explore.
What do you think on I don't know if you know this because that's not your specialty, but on the health side of it? I remember last season, or it may have been in season 2 of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, we interviewed Dr. Shanna Swain, who was with Brigham and Women's University. And I think she had just released her book. I forget the name of the book, but it was about her research that showed that plastics could produce male sexuality issues.
Yeah, so we actually have a webinar this week with Dr. Philip Landrigan on the health impacts, and there was a congressional hearing on plastics, a subcommittee hearing that Senator Merkley led, and Dr. Pete Myers spoke about endocrine disruption. So we know these chemicals disrupt the hormonal signals in our bodies, and that leads to, as you said, male infertility. So we can see these things. We know what certain chemicals are doing. It's a matter of with plastics, like Wynn was saying, it's the whole package, and then showing how that causes specific cancers or health impacts. But we know the negative health impacts of the components.
Yeah, Wynn?
Yeah, and I think this is just the tip of the iceberg of the understandings that we're having. So there's another example. Recently, they discovered that tire wear particles can cause die-offs of salmon. And, we're figuring out, this is the chemical that's responsible for that. And that triggers an entire change in the production system.
Tire wear particles?
Right, yeah. So from cars, our tires are breaking down into these tiny particles and getting into rivers. Constantly.
So all of that, that's just like the particles that come off our clothes. And tell us again what that's causing?
It is, so the stuff that's coming out of that into the water is causing salmon to die off in the Pacific Northwest. So this is and we know now what chemical in the tires causes that. So now the tire industry is changing their tire formulation. Hopefully we'll figure something out similar with the male reproductive issues, because that does seem to be a big thing. And we know that we're seeing declines in male fertility, around the world right now too. I'm not sure if that's the root cause or if there's some other things. There's a lot of toxic things in our environment, but yeah, it doesn't seem like it's helping.
See, it seems like to me, in my mind, that if people knew more people knew, and again, that's part of we try to play a little part in that here at Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, and that's again helping people to know, understand, and explore that plastics indeed. It's almost as time marches forward, we are finding out more and more every day how plastic is impacting health in very definitive ways. And the more research allows us to find out more. And we have not known before because we've not delved into it that much in terms of the health impact. I think plastics probably, the harmful effects or toxicity, the first perhaps noticeable place was environment. And with health, our bodies coming up second. But the thing about that is that is a strong generator or instigator, I think, for people to realize that we must push those legislators and those institutions so that, as you all have been saying the whole show, we can stop it at the production or the manufacture of the availability level. So that's, like what we like to do is connect the dots in that way. So, Wynn, let me, what other types of perhaps research questions or burning research is being done out there by the scientific community on plastic and plastic pollution?
we're doing a lot of research right now closer to the source. So a lot of the research started out in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away. And now we're starting to study trash, plastics getting into the environment right at roadsides, where a lot of times that's kind of their first entry into the environment. I think once
that's where they start, isn't it, to end up in the Great Pacific garbage patch?
Yeah. Yeah. And so if we study it right there, we can actually see the initiation point and those processes and those sources, and that can help us to really drive home that prevention a lot more explicitly. When we're out in the middle of the ocean, it's a lot harder to kind of make sense and connect the dots so that we can figure out what are the driving factors here.
Indeed. And I think that, that'll drive the research faster, too, I think. Christina, probably last thing, because we've only got a couple of minutes to go. And really two things. You've got the consumption side and you've got the drivers of plastics' impact on health. Are there any generational effects, particularly, or generational drivers, particularly, in theirs? Do younger people consume more or less, care more or less about it, have more or less health problems, or what?
Well, so, going back to endocrine disruption, for instance, that is transgenerational. That means that these changes are actually passed down to the next generation. So, we think we're going to see more health impacts in our kids that are being linked to these chemicals, to plastics. So that's one piece. Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're growing up in a very different world. And there's a lot of kind of social and political upheavals that are happening, and plastics is an intersectional issue. It touches on racism, it touches on gender, it touches on health, right? It touches on economics. So I do think that we will see more movement. I have a lot of hope in our youth, and I think we need to keep bringing them to the table. So, let's keep integrating youth into, when we go to the State House to advocate for a policy, for instance, because their voice needs to be heard.
And educating them. I think that was a big driver in the whole tobacco thing and the smoking cessation thing. They used to teach the kids in school, because my daughter would come home telling me, "Oh, you shouldn't be smoking that. You're killing me." And I imagine a lot of parents are hearing that now, too, about various environmental issues. So that makes a difference. And I think you hit that nail right on the head. Kids today are hearing the conversation daily about the harms and the effects of plastics on our health and our environment. So it makes a big difference. I want to thank you all for being with us today. We've been with Christina Dubin with Beyond Plastics and Wynn Cowger with the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research. And they really have made us much smarter about what's going on and what's so bad about plastics and why everybody doesn't know about it. Especially that last part, there's a lot of misperception and misinformation out there. But the good thing is we have 2 more shows in our series this month on plastic and plastic pollution, one of which we will almost exclusively explore health impacts. So thank you all very much for being with us today. We really appreciate your help with all of this. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and even in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is the result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. But each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening in today, and join us again next week for more on plastics and plastic pollution. Thank you.